Hello. In this video, I'm going to be talking about setting up a Pro Tools session template for use in a typical audio post-production session, particularly promo in this case. Usually I view the session and the way I approach making a template as the way I approach the mix, which is voiceover, then dialogue, then music, then sound effects. So this video is going to be just the first part of that, and that's going to be voiceover. So to create the voiceover portion of this session template, I'm going to need a few things. I'm going to need 2 auxes and we'll say 5 mono audio tracks. Now, just for the time being, I'm going to set them to no input and no output. The first aux I'm going to call mic. The second one is going to be called the VO aux, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The first audio track will be VO record. The next will be VO edit, and then we'll have a couple tag tracks for, tonight, next, day of the week, etc. Okay. Now I guess the tag tracks I would leave with no input and no output, because those will just serve as placeholders for those edited tracks. Okay, so logically the mic is first, but I think it's appropriate to move the VO record track right below it. Okay, so the mic's input is going to come from the interface, and I have 2 mic pre's set up, and that's just from mic pre 1. But you'll see that there are no buses set up at all. So let's set up a bus or 2. Okay, you'll know that we need somewhere for this mic to go to the record track. So let's set up just an aux for that right now, or a bus for that, I should say. So here we are in our I/O setup, buses, new path, and we just need a mono path, and we'll call it VO record, and hit OK. So now you'll see we can bus that to VO record. You can see my voice hitting that beaner, and the VO record track will now have VO record as an input. But even if I can't put this track in input yet because it has no output. So for the purposes of recording this voiceover, we can just have it go to the stereo bus. So now if I throw that in input, you'll see that the mic is now feeding there. So why, you may ask, did I not just put the mic pre-input here? Well, here's the reason. You might need to put a limiter on here so that you don't overload your channel. So I'm going to set that pretty high, -3, and that's fine. You may want to do a little compression. If I have this R compressor set up with a -10 threshold and a ratio of 2.5. That's pretty gentle, but you don't have to have those even engaged. You can just have those bypassed or even inactive. Okay, now they're not taking up any horsepower. So now that we can record our tracks, what would happen next? Well, we'd edit those tracks. So anything I record here, let's say I have a take there and a take there, I would probably just drag them down or copy them there and keep punching away. Okay, but this track, this edit track, is not going to go to the stereo bus like the record track is, because we need that to get some processing. And so the way I like to do that is bus it to the VO aux. So we need to create a bus for the VO aux, and the VO aux is going to need to go somewhere also. And so that's going to be the VO record stem. So let's set up some more buses. New path. We'll call it's one mono path, and we'll call this VO aux. Then set up another mono, which is VO stem. Okay, now we have two more buses. Super simple. Okay, so the VO aux is coming from whatever gets bused there to VO aux, and will be going to the VO stem, which means that our VO edit needs to bus to the VO aux. So now anything that's playing here will go through this aux. So now we can put our processing here. And why would you do that, you might ask? Why not just put that processing here? Well, because Pro Tools only has the inserts pre-fader. So if you do some work here and you've got some volume rides, and then you want to put a post-fader limiter or EQ or some other effect on it, you cannot do that by putting an insert here. You have to bus it somewhere else and put that insert there, because otherwise it won't be post-fader. So this is one way that you can have all of your post-fader inserts, by busing your edited track to an aux. Another reason you might want to do that is because you might have some overlapping voiceover from a couple different channels. Let's say you've got a list of names in a contest spot, and you have to get all of that information there. Well, you may split it across a few tracks. If you bus them both to the VO aux, then it's easy to control the whole volume of it. Okay? So one more track I want to create, and one more bus, is the VO stem bus. So we'll create a new track. It's also a mono audio track. And we're going to create a few buses, actually. So the first bus is the VO stem, which is a mono track. And it's going to be going to the mix. So we'll create another new path, and we'll call this mix bus. Actually, we're going to call it mix submaster. And that's going to be stereo, because we're going to work in stereo on this template. Okay, so now that bus is going to go to the mix submaster. We'll call this VO stem. So we have our voiceover coming into a microphone. We have a limiter and a compressor set up so that we don't overload our record channel. That mic is being bused to the record channel and then just listening through the stereo bus. That gets edited and sent down here to the edit track, which then gets bused to the VO aux. This aux track will potentially have some inserts on it, maybe an EQ, an overall EQ, or a compressor. Okay. So one other thing I want to do before we exit this session and stop talking about voiceover is I want to save some tracks. Okay. So I think it's important to solo save the mic track, the VO aux track, and the VO record. And the reason you want to do that, and actually also the VO stem track. And the reason we want to do that is so that anytime we hit solo, we're not accidentally muting our mic and blowing our recording. We're not accidentally muting our voiceover from going to the VO aux or muting the VO aux from feeding the VO stem. So those are now all solo safed. So anytime you hit solo on another track, those are still open and the signal will still flow one to the other. Actually, just to show you before we leave here how this flows all the way through the VO stem, I'm going to bus this to the stereo output just to show you that. So my mic is feeding there, and I'll do a test recording. This is a test of the emergency broadcasting system. So I stop, I move it to my edit track. You'll see that voiceover exists here. Now, since it's on the edit track, once I play it back, it's going to the aux and then to the stem. We've already set up all of the voiceover tracks that we need, including the mic, a place for the mic to record, an edit track, a place for the edit track to bus to, a place for that bus to bus to is a mix stem, and then some tag tracks. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set up the production tracks or dialogue. So in this case, we'll only need one aux track and we'll say 5 audio tracks. Okay, and we're going to do this very similarly to the voiceover. We'll start with no input and no output so we can know that we're doing this properly from the start. Okay, so we're going to call this the prod aux, and then we're going to create some production tracks. That's where we're going to put the dialogue we get in our OMF or AAF. And then we're going to create a stem track. Okay, and that's it. But we need a few buses. So obviously, these 4 production tracks are where your dialogue is going to reside. And again, they're going to bus to the production aux. And that's where we might do some overall processing, though you may do some processing here. So we'll need to solo safe that like we did with the voiceover. And that is going to bus to the production stem. So we'll need to solo safe that as well. Okay, so we need a production aux bus, a production stem bus. So let's create those. Go down to your I/O and create 2 more buses. Prod aux and prod stem. And that's all we need for right now. So the prod aux gets fed by prod aux, and it goes to the prod stem. The prod stem gets fed by the prod stem bus and goes to the mix submaster bus. These production tracks need no input, but they will all get bused to the prod aux. So now you can see that these tracks flow to the aux flows to the production stem. And that's it. So now we're going to move on to music. So we will need 1 stereo aux and 5 stereo audio tracks. Once again, we'll tell them to be no input and no output to start. And I'm going to call these MX aux, MX1, MX2, MX3, MX4, and MX stem. Okay, so these 4 will contain our music tracks where we'll do our editing and any nips and tucks and fades, etc. that we'll need. And those will all bus to this aux track where we can do some post-fader processing. And then that aux track will bus to the music stem. So once again, we're going to solo safe the aux and the stem. Okay, and we'll need to create 2 more buses. This time it'll be stereo buses. Let's go to our I/O, new path, stereo bus, MX aux, and then another stereo bus, and this is going to be MX stem. So this will be fed by the bus called MX aux and will go to the MX stem. The MX stem will get fed from the MX stem and go to the mix submaster. And these tracks will have no input but go to the MX aux. And now you can see that these will flow here and this will flow to here. Flying through. And now we're going to move on to our sound effects tracks. So we'll come down here. We're going to need a stereo aux. We'll say 5 mono audio tracks and another 5 stereo audio tracks, and then we'll need one more stereo audio track for the stem. So creating all of those, no input, no output, just like we've been doing. Okay? And we're going to call this FX aux. And now I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to point out, just in case it's not obvious, that it's mono sound effects. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then the next track will be stereo. I can spell. Stereo FX. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the last one will be our FX stem. Okay, so as you can imagine, we're going to need to set up a few buses again. So we'll go to the setup, new path. We need a stereo bus for the FX aux and another stereo bus for the FX stem. And that's it. Solo safe the FX aux, have its input coming from the FX aux, and its output going to the FX stem. All of our FX tracks are going to bus to the FX aux stereo. And this way we can pan the mono tracks and it'll go left or right in this stereo field at the FX aux because that's a stereo input. We'll solo safe the FX stem and create its input from FX stem, and of course its output is going to go to the mix submaster. So now we've got all of our basic elements here. We have the stems, we've got the auxes, but we're still missing a few little elements, and we're going to do some tidying up and some tricks here to make this easier to use. As we continue our discussion and set up our template, I just want to do a quick review of what we've done first. So we started with the voiceover. We set up a mic, had that mic come from the mic pre-input, and then bus to a record track, which we're just monitoring in stereo. We moved that first recording to our VO edit track, which buses to a VO aux track. And you see that there are some tag tracks here. Those are just placeholders for when you mix with multiple tags. And then there's a VO stem. So that's a record stem that's going to go and feed the mix. So I'm going to move that all the way down to the bottom. Going back up, we did something very similar with the production track, so we can mix our dialogue. We set up an aux where we can put some inserts, These production tracks all feed the aux. That aux feeds the production stem. I'm also going to move that down to the bottom. And that feeds the mix submaster as well. Similarly, we set up a music aux, and those 4 music channels feed the aux. The aux feeds the stem, also going down to the bottom. And something slightly different with the FX, because there are both mono and stereo effects. And so those feed the FX aux, and then FX aux feeds the FX stem, which I will now move to the very bottom. Okay, so these are where our stems are going to be recorded. Our voiceover stem, production stem, music stem, and sound effect stem. But you'll see that they're all bused to a mix submaster. And for very similar reasons for using the aux as above, I create a submaster, which I use as an aux here, and then I can put my mastering processing on that and record to a stereo audio track as my mix master. So I'm going to set up 2 more tracks. One is a stereo aux, and one is a stereo audio track. So the aux will be my mix submaster, and this will be my mix. Okay, so the submaster is going to come from the mix submaster, but it's got to go somewhere, and it's not got anywhere to go yet. So we need to set up another bus. One stereo bus, and we'll call that mix. So now we can bus that to mix. The mix gets its feed from mix, and it can go out the stereo output. Now everything flows through these stems to the submaster, to the mix. And of course, these tracks need to be solo saved. Okay. Hopefully that all makes sense. And now we're going to start doing a little more organizing. So one thing I like to do is color code. Since we're at the bottom here, let's start by color coding our record tracks. So I select all those tracks, and then I'm going to turn them red for record. Okay? Then I'm going to select all my stereo, mono, and even my effects aux, and I'm going to give a color to them as well. Let's make them green. That is a hideous green. Slightly less hideous. There we go. That's not so horrible. We'll give our music tracks their own color. I like this purple. We'll go with that. The production tracks, including their aux, we'll go with brown. And then all the VO will get blue. Okay, so now you can see at a glance, it is much easier to tell without any thought that this is VO, this is production, this is music, this is sound effects, these are my record tracks. Boom. Everything's easy to spot, easy to navigate, and you're in good shape. In the next segment, we're going to go a little further and set up some things that will make it easier for us to get our work done. Now we're going to put some of the finer touches onto our template. So once again, down here we have our record stems and our mix stem. But if we want to be able to hear everything, we need to have those in input, and we need to be able to put them into input and put them into record ready just in a simple click. So what I'm going to do is select all of these tracks and Command G to set up a group. I'll call this mix stripes or mix stems, we'll say, to keep it consistent. And I just want to have a mix group. And I don't want it to follow globals because I don't know what those are set up for right now. I could easily check. And I'm going to remove the mix submaster actually because that doesn't need to follow anything. And so the only attributes I want to have set up are record input and input monitoring. And that's all we need here. So now if I click input on any one of them, they all go into input. And if I click record ready on any of them, they all go record ready. So that's an easy way to get us ready to record our stems with the click of one button. Now, of course, you can get around this by just selecting one track and doing Shift R if you only wanted to record the VO stem for some reason, or if you only wanted to record the mix, you could do that. But now you have the option to listen through and record ready. Okay, now we're going to continue setting up our template and implement a few other little tricks to help us as we mix our promos. The first thing I like to set up is a marker at 1 hour straight up. So 1 hour marker, and we'll call it start. Since I don't know how long my promo is it a 10, a 15, a 30? I don't know. So I'm not going to put an end marker, but I am going to create a few more things here. So under window, you'll see configurations, and we're going to create a new configuration right now. And this one we'll have as the window layout, and we'll call this regions off. And then we're going to open up the regions window and the tracks window. Maybe we'll open that a little more so we can see better, and create a new window configuration. And we're going to call this one regions on. Okay. So now we close those back up again, and we're going to create a new marker. And this time we'll call this regions off. And instead of it being an actual visible selection with time properties, all we're going to have is a window configuration, regions off. But we're going to give that a number that's a little out of the range here. So we're not going to run into that too often. And then we're going to make another marker that's called regions on. We may call that 22. And same thing. We don't need to see it, and we'll just select regions on. So now if I select regions off, the windows are like they are now. Regions on, everything's open. So an easy way to toggle back and forth to see all your tracks and all of your regions without doing anything but a click. And now for our final bit of tidying up this template before we can use it, I'd like to look at some inserts. So as you saw before, I had set up but made inactive a limiter on the microphone and a compressor as well. Those are handy, but they were made inactive so that they're ready to go, but they're not eating up any horsepower. And I believe I showed you already the similar thing with the VO aux, where I put a EQ and a compressor as well. But note that the first insert here is not on the first available insert input. And I like to keep that open just in case I have something I want to add in front. I don't have to shuffle around. So I generally don't start at the first insert point, the exception being with the microphone track. We're going to do something similar on the production channels. I'll put an EQ and a compressor as well, and I will make those inactive. And then going down to the music track, we're going to do something a little bit different here. First, I will insert the plugin I want to use, which is Neutron 2 by Isotope. And what I want to do with this is I want to have a sidechain ducking EQ. And so I need to set up a bus so that I can have it feed this key. So let's go to Setup, I/O, and create a new bus. And this will be a mono bus, and this will be dialogue side chain. Okay, so now you can see that that bus is available. I'm going to make this inactive, but I'm going to copy it down to the effects aux because I think ducking around the dialogue and voiceover is appropriate on the sound effects as well. So I know I called it the dialogue sidechain, but I think it should duck around the voiceover as well. So what I'd like to do is add that bus to the output of the VO aux. In order to add it to the VO stem, I'm going to have to hold down Shift and Control, click on it, and then select that second bus. Now when I let go, you'll see that plus sign there, which tells me that there's more than one thing selected, and that's, we can see it here, VO stem and dialogue sidechain. And we'll do the same thing for the production stem. Production aux goes to the production stem, so we'll hold down Shift and Control and also select the dialogue sidechain. So now anything that flows through the production aux or the VO aux will feed the sidechain of the neutron that's on the MX aux or the FX aux. Finally, let's go down to our mix submaster, and once again we're going to put in a few plugins to have handy. I have an EQ that I like to start with as my master EQ, and also I have a multiband compressor that I like to start with on the master bus as well. But at the very last insert point, I'd like to put in my meter. So there are a number of choices. I'm putting in the Waves WLM Plus, and I put it last after these plugins because if it was beforehand, it wouldn't take into account the level changes that are affected by these two plugins. So once again, make it all inactive, and now you can see. So now our template is essentially complete. We've got all of the tracks set up. They're routed everywhere they need to go. They're color-coded. The flow works nicely. They've got some inserts set up at the ready, but still made inactive. You've got a start marker and even some configurations that are set up under some extra markers so you can get to regions on and regions off quickly. All we need to do now is save this as a template. So under File, Save as Template. We'll call it Promo Stereo and click OK. So now we have our template saved. Let's close it and then open New from Template, and there it is. Let's open that up and check it out. Save it as something else. And there you go. Everything's all set. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something in this video on how to set up a session template in Pro Tools. Catch me on the next video.